Hello there, welcome to the Advanced and Fulfilled Coaching free video resource section. And my name is Anita Adifiye. I'm the CEO and founder of Advanced and Fulfilled Coaching Company. We are a company dedicated to helping racialized and immigrated professionals advance in their careers in Canada. Now, today we are going to be talking about, or actually, before we jump into what we're talking about today, thank you for being here. If you are new, I encourage you, please go ahead and subscribe. And even if you're returning and you haven't subscribed, you just watch our videos, please go ahead, hit the subscribe button, turn on the notifications so you know every time that we have a brand new video just for you. And today we are going to be talking about types of interviews that employers may use. Now, if you have seen our previous video on how to ace your interviews, this is something that complements that particular video. If you haven't seen that, I strongly encourage you, please go ahead and get that video and watch it. It would really help you, especially if you have an interview coming up. Now, today we are going to be talking about the different types of interviews that employers potentially use. And it's important that you walk into interviews prepared to answer questions in any of these different formats. Now, I remember walking into an interview once and then they asked me a question like, on one occasion, they asked me a question on what is taxation. Thankfully, I answered that when I got that job. But on a different interview, I walked in and they asked me a question, who is considered the founder or father of modern day economics? And I sat there thinking, why am I being asked this kind of question? But in the job description, it clearly stated that the individual must have strong knowledge of economic principles and theories. Clearly, somebody didn't have strong knowledge of economic principles and theories. Economics is not my best. Anyway, so I don't want anyone to fall into the same pit that I did, and that is why I am doing this particular video to help you understand different kinds of interviews, how to prepare for them, and show up ready to answer questions along those lines. So the first one we're going to talk about, of course, is knowledge questions, knowledge interviews. Now, this interview tests your knowledge or skill related to the job. All right. So, for example, you might be asked to demonstrate how to use a particular software program, write a report, or solve a math problem. For some of us in the world of policy, we see this happen a lot where you do an oral interview, but then part of your interview is also that you write a briefing note or you write a report for the minister, and that is considered part of your interview. Now, in some other instances, they might just ask you questions around the concept. So, for instance, if you're in policy, they might ask you a question like, can you describe the policy cycle and give an example of how you might use that to develop policy recommendations? That right there tests your knowledge on whether or not you know what policy cycle is and the process involved and how you go about writing a policy. So this is an example of knowledge question. So go ready to answer questions about what you know. In another instance, they might also ask you questions around knowledge around so theories, concepts, and ideas within that sector, within that job, or as it applies to that company. They might also ask you questions about what you know of the company. So, for instance, they might ask you questions like, or again, I've been in an interview where they asked me a question around what are the key economic sectors of Saskatchewan, right? And so imagine if I didn't know that, I won't get that job, right? So you go in understanding what are the key things that I need to know for anyone who claims to be in this career field, and go prepared to answer those. Now, the second type of interview questions that they might ask, or category of interviews that I might ask is situational interviews. Now, these interviews, they might present you with hypothetical scenarios that you may encounter on the job. Customer service typically is the most popular one I can think of on this one. Tell us about a time you had to deal with an irate customer. I got to a point where I hated that word irate. Anyway, let's stick to the plan here. And so they might ask you hypothetical questions, and how you would handle them is really what they're looking for. So, for example, they ask you how you'll deal with an angry customer. Your response should show that you have dealt with one before, and even if you haven't, you can also hypothetically answer and say, here's what I would do in a scenario like that. So they're watching to see how you would react, how you would approach problem solving, or they may ask you how you deal with tight deadlines. So for instance, if the job description says, if the job description says that the individual must know how to handle multiple conflicting deadlines, go prepared to answer a situational question on how you handle tight deadlines. And of course, this is where typically most people tend to use the STAR method. And for those who don't know what STAR is, it's an acronym that represents a framework to help you structure your interview responses. And STAR means situation, task, action, and results. So you want to go there ready to understand. Now, knowing the company culture would also help you know how best to answer situational questions. If it is a company that values relationship over results, you better be aware of that, and that should guide how you respond to situational questions. Because if your response ended with "we got the job done but then someone was hurt," or at least even if it insinuates that, and that company is a company that values relationships over results, chances are they won't identify with you as a great fit. So go prepared to answers to that as well. Now, the third category is behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviews. These are used to describe your past situations where you've dealt with things or demonstrate your abilities, but even much more so, it seeks to uncover who you are as a person. With situational questions, anybody can respond to a specific issue in any way because you maybe know that someone is watching you. Or so for instance, for those who are in customer service dealing with irate customers on the phone, you know that there's that thing the customer has heard, that this call may be recorded for whatever purposes. So because you know that, you might handle the situation differently. But behavioral questions really dig a little deeper into who you are as a person. Again, here you want to use STAR method as well. And so they would ask you to demonstrate your abilities and personality traits. So for example, they might say, tell us about a time you showed leadership or took an initiative or were creative. This is one fun example that I love that I was asked during an interview. In fact, two interviews during the pandemic. One was, how did the pandemic change? I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but it was something on how I responded to the pandemic. And I loved it because it really made me, I did go through a process, people, during the pandemic. My book, the decision to write my book, to start a YouTube video, my company, all of this happened during the pandemic for me. And so really understanding, and in a world today where companies value adaptability, flexibility, and resilience. That was a very interesting question. I hope I have not put people in trouble by giving hiring managers questions to ask that is not in the traditional sense in the traditional types of questions. But truly, it was a question that I personally loved. It was out of the box. Those are the kind of questions that really help me shine myself, who I am, to the interviewer and potential hiring manager. So behavioral questions will do that to you. But again, you want to make sure that you go in prepared with examples. So the thing with behavioral and situational type questions is that it forces you to move away from generalistic responses to digging into very specific examples of what you as an individual have done. And that's one of the things that I love about them. And this is where you need to really understand what your accomplishments are in every job you've worked or throughout your life. Again, for a lot of hiring managers, they may or may not agree or take this, but the truth is that, and I've seen lots of hiring managers as well who would take either you responding to a situation or question hypothetically and or drawing on examples that were not achieved in the workplace, so to speak. So behavioral interviews, they test and demonstrate your abilities and personality traits, getting to really know who you are as a person. And finally, we'll talk about competency interviews, competency questions, and these really just assess or test your core competencies or transferable skills. Some people might call this competency or skill based interview. And this is where you really show what you know and how you have applied them. So, what are you competent on? Right? And so, for instance, so again, you want to know what the key competencies within the job descriptions the job descriptions are. And once you know what the key competencies are, so for instance, if the key competencies that they listed is communication, then you want to go prepared to that interview with again, you want to have examples of how you have applied the competency of communication. And you might maybe hear questions like maybe tell us about a time that, this tell us about a time, really, it's an interesting one. But anyway, you might hear something like, tell us about a time where you had to demonstrate excellent communication, or had to speak to different audiences about the exact same thing, or tell us about a time you had to take a complex document and relay its content to someone who has no knowledge in that area. Those are ways of testing, for instance, your communication skills, your ability to take complex information and pass it across to a different audience in a way that is understandable to that specific audience. Or you might also hear something along the lines of how you manage and prioritize tasks, right? And this again, it will all depend on the kind of job description that you have. So you want to go into an interview understanding what the key competencies required for the job are within your life. Look through your life, your experiences, and provide specific examples that showcase your proficiency in each of these areas, and anticipate those questions based on the job descriptions that has been asked of you. Overall, I just want to say this: whatever question you're asked, including knowledge questions, I always recommend still find a way to tie it into an example. Never give very generic responses. So for instance, if you're asked a question on how do you walk us through the steps of policy development, use an example to say, here are the different steps, and I've applied this, for instance, in a situation like this where I had to do this. When I did XYZ, that was me doing the problem identification. And when I did XYZ, that was me understanding who my stakeholders were. Just walk them through the process and what it looks like. Now, depending on whatever kind of question type of interview that company is taking you through, you would already have used that one question to answer through the lens of competency, behavioral, and knowledge. So I strongly encourage you, whatever question, not every question would require an example for sure, but to the degree that you can tie in an example, I strongly recommend using the STAR method. Tie in an example. You will show that you don't just know things from a theoretical perspective, but you have applied them and you know exactly what it is that they're talking about and what they're looking for. Never forget that you have more than what it takes. Many of us have way more than we realize, and I just want to remind you that you have what it takes. So show up to that next interview. Sometimes you might show up, by the way, and that it's a combination of these different types of interviews, right, that they're asking you. So again, go in, show prepared. Look at your job description. Wherever it says you must have a strong knowledge of, note that and prepare to potentially answer knowledge-based questions around that. And wherever it says you must have these competencies, the key competencies we're looking for, show up, note them down, and show up ready to answer questions along those competency lines. If they say you must have demonstrated an ability, that's behavioral. Go knowing that they might ask you questions along behavioral lines. So whatever it is, or if they say that you must have done XYZ, go prepared to answer questions on situational experiences. So I implore you, please be prepared. Anyone can ace an interview if they prepare. Preparation is key. Knowing what you have will increase your confidence and change how you show up. But also knowing the job description and knowing what your potential employer needs would also be very vital. One thing I always tell all our clients is know what the company needs, know what you have, and know where they align, or find a way to align them both, and show up telling that story to potential hiring manager. And if they don't hire you, They probably took an internal candidate, but your chances are much higher. So I encourage you. And if you have an interview, I wish you all the best. Have a great time, and I'll see you around. And you can check our website for other free resources that we have. If you want to book a session with us, you can also do that through our website. And feel free, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend that your one stop career coaching company is in town. We look forward to working with you, and we really wish you all the best in your career journey. But what will make us even more happier is that we get to walk that journey with you. I look forward to seeing you. Take care now, and bye.